Beyond Classified. I'm Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Dave Zed. He's a researcher and host and creator of the Generation Zed Podcast. Dave, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much. As I said to you just before we started here, coming off of a bit of a cold, so forgive me to yourself and to your audience if I sound a little bit congested. But other than that, great, can't complain, and I'm very honored and grateful to be back.
Yeah, man, it's great to have you back. I hope you're feeling better soon. You look fine, so we're going to get through this. Today, I want to discuss what we're seeing being displayed by our mainstream media, the Pentagon, and other high-level mainstream entities, and that's the artists formerly known as UFOs, now known as UAPs. I have to be honest, the more this is pushed by our government and media, the more I know that we're probably being deceived on many levels. They don't exactly have the best track record of ever telling the truth about anything. So we'll see how this goes. But that's what we're trying to figure out, and I thought who better to discuss this with than Dave. Now, since you first started looking into UFOs, and especially since 2017 when everybody had their eyes on UFOs, how has your view of this phenomenon changed or evolved?
Well, I appreciate the you laying it out in the way you did, because I would say that one thing I've noticed is that there are many, for lack of a better term, elements or factions, if you will, that are constantly infighting. And the reason I say this is because I don't know to what extent certain forms of technology or craft are quote unquote real. As to who they belong to, you name it, I'm of the humble opinion that unless one is up close to a craft, it is very difficult to discern as to whether or not that craft is a projection, a hologram, or something that we would call tangible, if you will. But one thing that I've seen from 2017 until now is that we've certainly seen a lot of people and a lot of different areas and avenues and agencies as well, for that matter, redirect themselves and rebrand themselves, reshape themselves, some seemingly for the better, some for worse. And that's all up to personal perspective. So who am I to say? But I'll give you an example. We see with the Director of National Intelligence, I think the one of the badges, forgive me, I don't have the exact specificities off the top of my head, had a UFO symbol recently put into it, now into its official logo. And when you click on the logo on the, I believe it's I don't know if it's the DNI website, Director of National Intelligence, or one of the websites along there, that when you click on it, it takes you to the Air Force's website. And what that tells me ultimately, I do not mean to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but when it doesn't take a genius to realize that if there's one group, agency, entity, you name it, that is attempting to keep all this quiet, it's certainly USAF, at least within the West, certainly United States Air Force. Now, I do not mean to disrespect or allude or try to, make conclusions that, the average fighter pilot, if you will, is in on it. Not at all. But I think what we're seeing is certain elements in the higher echelon levels of the Air Force, if you will, battling it out. And what I see, for example, and maybe I'm over speculating, but when you click on that symbol from the Director of National Intelligence, the office there, and it takes you to the Air Force's website. Maybe I'm just making stuff up here, but I see that as a battle of factions, in the sense of, okay, we have some that want this to come out, that feel that this can come out with respects to maybe some of the disclosure of the technology, maybe some of the knowledge itself, without endangering national security. And I don't mean to speak like a government person, but I will say that to your audience, make of this as you will, I am of the humble perspective that when one cracks quote unquote anti-gravity, it's quite possible that you've opened a plethora of capabilities other than just propulsion. And I think that's one of the concerns. If one cracks quote unquote anti-gravity, you then get into other realms of things. And then comes the concern, well, okay, if it's true what some have said, that it's easier to make this stuff than a lot of people think, well, you're going to have people, doing it out of their homes and what have you. And look, I'll be honest with you, man, to a certain degree, it's concerning when terrorists, are trying to get their hands on nukes. If they get their hands on this stuff, you got a much bigger problem. Now, we can get into the conversation of, well, who funded the terrorists and who started them? And granted, that's a fair point. But sorry for the rambling answer. Long story short, I see different factions going, basically. That's what I see. And I see Yeah, basically different factions. Some personally, I expect it to be a little more forthcoming than other factions, if that makes sense. But it's a tough nut to crack, if that makes sense. So
yeah, it is. And a lot of the information that we considered the foundation of ufology has been recently kind of being debunked. A lot of great researchers, in my view, have been coming out with information about the Roswell incident, for instance, that doesn't really match what any of the original stories were. And it's possible that these might have been crashed Japanese dirigibles, and the U.S. was just embarrassed about the whole thing, so they blamed it on UFOs. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened, but a lot of the evidence that is pointing in that direction, I find it very interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
I do as well. You see, for example, Miss Annie Jacobson some years ago with her book saying that she was told by a source who's now deceased from the Atomic Energy Commission that those were genetically modified children made by Stalin to throw off Truman and all of that stuff. I'll be honest with you. If I'm not there myself, I say this on our show all the time as well. I don't if I'm not there myself, I won't say. But one thing that I do find peculiar is that notice what I would say is to attempt to view just one perspective, the landscape in a way that notice conflicting stories occur when allegedly behind the scenes more developments are made. To me, that speaks of a push-pull sort of internal battle. The closer someone gets behind the scenes to potentially divulging some of this, whether in an official capacity or otherwise, the more disinfo and conflicting stories come out around the same time. So I see that as, again, that's psychological warfare, that's strategy, that's chess, if you will. That is not to say that all of what Miss Annie Jacobson was told or what you had just reported so eloquently, that is incorrect. Not at all. I'm just saying it speaks to the idea that notice whenever there's infighting, more and more leaks and stories begin to change. So is there a there? Absolutely. We've recently taken a turning on our channel, attempting to. I've recently started myself like a Substack, a newsletter, to try and gain a military intelligence perspective on this. If I could give a quick example, if I may, I put an article out just yesterday called "If It's Stackable, It's Hackable" via WMDs, but the two words hackable and WMDs don't necessarily refer to what one may think they mean. It means. So to me, forgive me, I'm just reading off of what I wrote here yesterday. There's three types of WMDs: weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass disruption, and that's a whole other category as well that's just emerging, but also weapons of mass discussion. The thing with weapons of mass discussion is, say you have a photograph of a UFO. Let's stick in this realm of examples here. And say, for example, you see this UFO, this picture, you want to send it to some friends, but not to others, right? What you've done just by choosing to send it to some friends and not to others is you have now psychologically ascertained the validity of that image's worth based on your own personal judgment. Based on who you send it to, certain actions will then occur from there. You have and this is what I mean when I say the word hack is not what people may think, because someone observing or surveilling you in whether a collective sense or in a very focused sense, the whole idea of, well, this person shared the image to some and not to others. By definition, just analyzing what that person did, arguably one could say that person has been hacked without needing to be hacked in the traditional sense, if you will. So in other words, what that person just did by sending that image to some people and not to others is they were hacked non-electronically via an image that is electronic. So talk about irony. And that's what we're trying to do on the show, more recently, with trying to gain that perspective, because I'm of the humble view, if we don't do that, then we're just speculating like the rest of the world. So
right. And I want to get into some of the individuals that have been pushed on the scene as whistleblowers. And of course, these are former military, people who have been involved with black projects. A couple of examples, Rick Doty, the gentleman you had on, Lou Elizondo. Now, of course, I have my own reasons that I don't trust anything coming out of these gentlemen's mouths, but they were admitted at one time counterintelligence, and I believe Lou Elizondo even said in an interview that he's applying his same counterintelligence skills to the UFO community. And that, for me, is just a huge red flag there. But the fact that these individuals were kind of forced into this community, and now, like, Doty has a Showtime special coming up. These guys are making bank off conferences. It's very shady to me. It seems like this is all a huge theatrical setup behind the scenes.
To that point, this is one of the things that I say when I speak of factions, and I don't mean to allude to anyone in particular. It gets interesting because I'll be honest with you, man. It's very, in my opinion, it's very strategical. And for example, I don't mean to defend nor offend, for example, Mr. Doty, Mr. Elizondo, you name it. But when people look, for example, at this is how I try and view when people say, okay, there's this event going on and they're making money. Absolutely. Everyone has the right to free speech to give their perspective. And who am I to say if I'm right or wrong for that matter? As a matter of fact, I would, even on our show, we talk about how disagreements shouldn't be labeled that per se, perhaps. Maybe disagreements are by definition the opposing or perpendicular view that makes up the rest of those metaphorical slices of that pizza or pie. So by definition, all the disagreements make one. Now, back to your question, when you see things like people trying to make money and things like this, there's the whole concept of, well, okay, I try and do my best on the show to play devil's advocate. Well, okay, people have to eat. Well, it's like, okay, they have to eat, but at the same time, why does one need to charge X amount?
Well, here's the thing. I don't have a problem with people making money at all. In fact, you know, I do the same thing. I have to make a living doing this. My problem is, it's not even a problem. It's a question. How did they get propped up above everyone else in this field that just wants to make money, except they're at the top now. And they just got there because they are who they are. And, you know, it's not just about making bank, but they are making bank, but they're at the highest level, like a Showtime special, HBO specials. Sure. You're on the top of the scene, right?
Okay, now to that point, this is where I would say that, and I don't mean this in a defensive nor offensive manner. I really genuinely mean it. To your audience, as I say to mine, make of this as you will. I think what we're seeing is perhaps the more publicly nowadays, what has always potentially been the relationship between the entertainment industry and military intelligence, for example. I think, for example, what we're seeing when we see certain events get put on or certain groups make presentations, things like this, I don't rule out the possibility that this may be one faction attempting to convey a message to another while making the public view something separately, if you will. To me, that doesn't speak to personally, am I for nor against any one individual? To me, that speaks to strategy. To me, that speaks to, okay, if there's a game going on, I want to see the whole chessboard. I want to think outside of the box, and then I want to observe within it. So to me, that's how I see it. Honestly, man, and I forgive me if I'm trying to answer this in as best I can, even, for example, with Mr. Doty. Ultimately, these are controversial individuals, arguably, but what I notice big picture is people still watch. So from a strategic perspective, it's kind of like the more Trump yaps off, the more people watch, even if they don't like him. So to me, it's this whole idea of, okay, let's go like fractals. Let's go even bigger than that, macro. Let's look, okay, what's the objective here? Is Mr. Doty trying to push a particular narrative? Is Mr. Elizondo trying to? And I really don't mean that in a I guess you could say, conflicting based manner. I really mean that in a neutrally observed, what's the strategy? Is it, for example, in line with what, I would want to see with respect to disclosure or not? So that's where I stand on that. For me, it's kind of like, okay, a move was made, a pawn was moved, or a king or a castle, if you will. What's the next move? For me, that's how I see it personally. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. Now, there's many levels of this, as we both mentioned earlier. One of them, it's dots that are being attempted to be connected right now is there a connection between UFOs and actual aliens and extraterrestrial beings, what we think of as extraterrestrials? Now, first of all, a lot of the footage of the craft that they've been showing us in our mainstream media from the Pentagon, some of those I've seen, I know as a TR3, which apparently is already ours. So that's a red flag there, that they're showing us something that most people may already know as ours. Now they're trying to connect, definitely, that these craft are probably not flown by human beings. Now, where does that leave us? Aliens. They're trying to push it to where these crafts are being flown by entities that are non-human. And we've all known since the beginning of the UFO phenomenon that the UFOs have been connected with aliens, mainly from the earliest abduction stories that we've heard and Hollywood and the media. So it's always the same story of individuals trying to connect aliens and UFOs. But do we have any real evidence at all that these are even remotely connected together?
This is the part where it comes down to, in my opinion, personal experience. And I don't mean that as a cop-out answer. I genuinely mean that, because if we realize that, for example, potentially we are the pillar individually of our own experiences. For example, say, brother, you and I are going for a bite to eat, say, and we see a craft in the sky. You see a cube, I see a triangle, but it's in the same spot, but we're perceiving it differently relative to the information structures that are being conveyed. So you're not wrong nor right, neither am I. This is when I don't mean to get all esoteric and woo or what have you, but when we look at, again, I don't mean to throw this word quantum around a lot, because I know everyone, quantum this, quantum that, the fuck does it mean? Trust me, I'm with everyone on that. But this idea of multiple perspectives and each perspective having its own truth and incorrectness, I think this... Honestly, brother, I've been doing a lot of equations and a lot of attempting to do many different things. And one thing that I've found is personally, and I could be wrong, every avenue I take leads me back to what we call, as Dr. Niels Bohr said many years ago, decades, what we call real are made up of things that are not real at all. So to me, it comes down to, the more I try and dive into the nuts and bolts stuff, man, the more I find that it leads to the non-nuts and bolts stuff, truly. So this becomes an issue for me as well. And if I may say, I don't discredit human ingenuity, not at all. Humans, I think I am of the humble perspective. There are groups of humans, whether now or prior, whether thousands of years ago, hundreds, or just decades ago, that potentially cracked this, what we call anti-gravity, without the assistance of anything non-terrestrial. That I do believe that as well. Now, I'm of the ideological opinion subscription of that. Now, do I think that completely dismisses the whole, there are ETs? No, but I understand the perspective of when people say, well, hold on a second, if our subconscious is like sort of the metaphorical mattress or bed frame that's holding all of this up, who's to say that, for example, some type of psychotronic capability couldn't have someone transfer, for lack of a better explanation, their consciousness from their human body to, say, a gray body, and then visit people in the gray body, and then next thing you know, to that person, that's an alien. So this is where my mind goes, and I have to, at the moment, check the all the above box, because if I'm following the sciences that I'm personally researching and working on, by definition, as we see with the dual slit experiment, reality is only as real as the individual observing it. I would dare to postulate, I could be wrong, that one's belief becomes their reality by definition. So this idea of consensus reality, I prefer to call it consensus harmonics. So, for example, this cup, you and I are both agreeing, our subconscious are both saying to each other, yeah, we both see the cup, so it must be there. Well, when we really do a deep dive into it, our nervous system is being sent electromagnetic pulses, more so electrically, that are then feeding back via the photonic perception optically, because photons are the only thing that our eyes can see at face value fully, directly. Everything else is kind of is on a spectrum, thermally, visually, all of that. It's then feeding electromagnetic pulsations back to the nervous system, to the brain, via that of the optical senses that then tell the brain, no, this is there. So I don't mean to do a whole deep dive on that, but this is why I wanted to be concise with it, because when people talk about, well, what is real, what is not, things like this, we have to ask ourselves, to what extent what does that even mean to you as an individual? And there is no right or wrong answer. This is the other thing as well, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, and I do believe that parties interested in this, high-level government and corporate interests, know a lot more than they will ever say. I do believe that what we've seen from NASA and everything that we've been told about space is not exactly what it's not the truth. I think the traditional model of space is a lot different than what is actually out there. And I find it very interesting. I have a friend that has about 2 or 3 NDAs that he's signed right now. He owns property right near Skinwalker Ranch, and there are aerospace companies that are very interested, and they want to come out there and do experiments, and they have been. So then I asked myself, why are aerospace companies interested in doing experiments, especially underground? That is one of the main areas that they'll be looking. So they obviously know a lot more than they're putting on, because these are areas of high strangeness. That's the only reason that they want to go out and investigate this stuff. And they're not looking in space. They're looking underground. So I find that highly fascinating.
I will say there are files that if one looks, there are files that come from or allegedly have come from aerospace corporations, some now defunct in terms of they've gone either changed names, been bought out, you name it. That's a whole other ballgame, a whole other area of strategical observation and analysis, but from the military intelligence side. But there is supporting evidence. I wouldn't even say anecdotal nor circumstantial. I would say overall supporting evidence that this stuff has been, I wouldn't want to say cracked, because if I wasn't there myself, it would be unfair for me to say, but that there has been extreme experimentation, both theoretically on the theoretical scientific side and on the engineering side since World War II. I mean, it's out there. So it doesn't surprise me at all that, forgive me, I think it's Ryan.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Great guy. Just had him on the show recently myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't surprise me with respects to aerospace corporations being interested in things under the surface instead of above it.
Now, that being said, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on that aerospace companies are looking underground, and that we've been lied to so much about the traditional model of space, and we've been told aliens are coming from space, but they're looking for probably aliens here? What does that tell you?
I'm going to be honest with you, brother. I'm going to have to not comment right now. I'm involved with some stuff that I have to be careful with. Okay. I'm going to have to, unfortunately, there's no way I can answer that at the moment. I would say that maybe someone or some group has realized to look sort of like even spiritually from a personal perspective. Don't look up, look within.
Right. Now, I don't know how much you can talk about, but I do want to get into the realms of possibilities that there are things like pocket dimensions and realities that exist all around us at all times that we just can't perceive. And that's where some of these things are coming from.
Yeah, that would be, Dr. Pudov, I think, has a fantastic paper, The Polarizable Vacuum Theory. I think he published in 2001. Forgot exactly which publication or which journal, but anyways, this, in my opinion, there are a few different ways one could do this, but this speaks to what's called local space-time metric engineering. Basically, you can re-engineer the local vicinity of what we call "quote unquote" empty space, which arguably is not empty, to then adjust to certain conditions, let's call it, so that and also adjust the conditions locally so that maybe one person standing in one part of the room is seeing one thing, whereas someone on the other part of the room is seeing another. Does this cross the threshold of science being indiscernible from magic? In my opinion, absolutely. Is there? Yeah. I would say that it's certainly, this is what I mean when I say human ingenuity. Don't discount it. But I also don't mean to give that as a vague sort of like, oh, there's no such thing as ETs. I just think that I think that we see a lot of footage coming out now of alleged, craft being tested in the 70s and 80s by humans and human aerospace corporations, seemingly. But this becomes the issue, brother, I'll tell you, in my opinion, when we start talking about local space-time metric engineering, because if one can engineer the local, what's called, vacuum or quote unquote empty space, you can engineer something that others can perceive as what you want it to be. So this then brings the question of, okay, when someone claims to see a shapeshifter or something like this, is the person really, are their facial features really changing, or is the information structure that comprises the reality we're in, changing its form as to cater to a particular outcome to that particular observing individual. So that's where I go.
Man. No, I love it. And that makes me think of like Bigfoot and Dogman encounters where, these beings, probably flesh and blood, but they may have the advanced consciousness ability to obscure our perception of them, or have a way to, emit some kind of energy field or something that obscures our vision or changes our perception of them. And that may be what's happening with a lot of these cryptid sightings and things like that, right?
I would say so too. Yeah. I would say when you look at things like Bigfoot and all that, again, we apply that information structure concept there. This is another thing, man. I'll be honest with you. Let's go full force on this one, in the sense that if you have, say, for example, I'm just, pleased to your audience, I'm making leaps here, but just for the example, bear with me. Say a certain government or a certain group within the government is given tech by someone else, you name it, or maybe they make it themselves, or a bit of both, that can deceive people into thinking they're seeing Bigfoot instead of someone or something else. To me, I apply this method or this concept or view the same way I do about half an hour ago when I brought up it's indiscernible unless you're up close, in my opinion, to be able to, just like the craft in the sky, it's indiscernible to say, even locally on the ground, was this a hologram, a projection, someone with an extremely advanced information structural space-time metric adjusting suit, for lack of a better term, or was this genuinely what, again, this speaks to, man, you can't look into the phenomenon without getting into life, but yeah.
And that kind of brings up what I want to get into, is some of the religious and spiritual implications of this. Back in the, whenever the Collins elite, groups like that were looking into this, they warned that these things were not to be messed with, that they were possibly demonic. And fast forward to today, there are, again, groups that are warning against these same things, that we shouldn't be looking into this, that this is something more of a spiritual nature, that this is something demonic, something evil. And there are pretty high-level individuals that are talking about this. Now, I don't know how deep you go into some of the spiritual aspects, but there's two very different sides of this. We have the contactees who have these beautiful experiences, meeting hybrid children, being told about the implications of our future and how we need to clean the planet, and all these wonderful things. And then we have the more negative experiences, which seem to often involve military individuals and humans, and mixed along with ETs. But they'll look over, they're on the table and they see in the corner an individual dressed in military outfit. And it seems like the more I've heard of these nefarious instances, it's along the lines with human encounters as well. And the love and light and beautiful encounters are all more of etheric or astral encounters, or people are having these in their dreams. And it doesn't seem so nefarious. There are very few nefarious encounters where I hear in these astral realms. And after people say maybe have some kind of hypnosis or regression to learn more about these experiences, they become even more positive and not so much negative. And the more layers that you uncover, through hypnosis or regression, a lot of these experiences are actually very positive. And I want to get your thoughts on that dynamic there.
Well, I appreciate the question immensely. When I have to stop to think, it's because there's so much I want to get into. So thank you. When we see people talk about the more beautiful experiences, people talk about, more, I literally, my body felt lighter. Every time I moved my hand, it literally felt like, felt beautiful, for lack of a better explanation, things like this. We go into that quite extensively. I will say that one thing that I find is that this concept of there being, people talk about, there being an ether or empty space, or being a fluid, if you will, or something like this. Well, I find that view interesting, and you'll see where I'm going with this, in the sense that if you took a human and threw them in a swimming pool where the water was exactly the same temperature as that person, other than them having issues breathing, they would not know they're in water. So, but it would have to be the exact temperature of every part of that particular person's body. Point being is, however, now think, for example, with that swimming pool metaphor, think about hovering or treading water over the deep end. You're trying to stay up. You're trying to stay out on the top of the water, keep your head above water. Now imagine you let yourself go and you sort of kind of, you hold your breath, whatever, you get down to the bottom of the deep end. And then, but it's, say deep end's, 10 feet deep down, whatever. But it's hard to stay at the very bottom of the deep end. But you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to go back up. I'm going to put a breathing thing on, whatever, because I want to stay at the bottom of the deep end. You realize that in order to stay down there, you need to, for lack of a better example, tape some bricks or something heavy to your feet so you stay down. I think that example can also be applied to the benevolent experiences, the more astral ones, compared to that of the more physical military ones. I think this also speaks to the different factions. I think what we're seeing is an attempt by something else, whether benevolent or otherwise, to at least convey a particular message that is perhaps non-local, not from here. Like Roger Penrose discusses, he's of the opinion consciousness is non-computational because it is not here. Like it's not on Earth, it's not in our solar system. And I appreciate how he says, I can't really say what it is, more so as what it is not. And so, you look at people like that and academics saying things like this. I'm of the humble opinion that if there were to be different groups, whether military or otherwise, working on this and trying to understand that angle, they would bring people like Dr. Penrose in, people like, Mr. Jacques Vallée in, things like this. And I say that because they're open to all the different possibilities of what this could be. And I think the astral experiences are more enlightening because of the fact that, by definition, sort of like frequencies representing densities, if you will, thicknesses. There's only so much that if one is at a certain wavelength or density to then transition to the next one and maintain such a transition. Now, let me give an example, if I may, to wrap this up. I don't mean to be vague with quantum consciousness, frequency, this and that, because you can only go so far until people say we got to raise our vibration. Okay, no shit, Sherlock, but how? So let's say, for example, people talk about even being in the age of Aquarius, the age of truth. I would agree with that, but more from a scientific perspective. So say, for example, you live in New York and it's wintertime, you live in an apartment, let's say. It's freezing cold overnight, you're sleeping. The window's open. Why one would have a window open, freezing cold New York? Just bear with me. And you feel the cold coming in, and you have one blanket on you as you're sleeping in bed. You feel the cold come in. Are you going to feel the cold if you have more, if you have one blanket on you, or if you have five? You're going to feel it if you have one, because there's less density and thicknesses of the other blankets not being there to allow the cold to be felt more. I liken that to the frequencies, if that makes sense.
It does. Now, I've had plenty of psychedelic experiences. I've looked into this a lot. I personally believe that this actually gives you more access to some of these realms and vibrations. It's kind of like a cheat code to the Matrix. You're getting access to this. Would you agree with that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I would say as well, who would I be to disagree with that? You see what I'm saying? And this speaks to even this concept of disagreements. Let's just say, for example, you may hold a perspective that I simply don't have because I've never experienced it. So to call it a disagreement, I'm not saying you are, I'm just saying in general, I think is something that if there was something that wanted to keep us trapped here, let's say, they would probably call it a disagreement. But yes, short answer, oh yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%.
Now, some believe that we are being guided by intelligences, extraterrestrial, or possibly even a version of us from the future. And there is definite evidence that there are different factions trying to get us to go in different directions. I do definitely see a technological side where we're being guided into this technological age and a more controlled age and probably more nefarious. And then we see this angle where we want to go back to a more natural spiritual age, and there's different groups being pushed different directions, and a lot of these messages are being conveyed through paranormal and contact experiences, which I find very interesting. Have you noticed the same thing?
I would slightly bring this back to the whole density with frequencies. If there is a benevolent force that, say, for example, is by definition lighter in existence, it'd be kind of like strapping bricks to your feet to stay in the deep end if they wanted to communicate to us here. Hence why I think a lot of those experiences are more short-lived in relative to the experiencer having them compared to the more negative experiences where, I got probed, I got this, I got that. I think that's what we're seeing. Yeah, I think we're seeing a very, very various forms of communication, both locally and non-locally, that are trying to. I think as above, so below. By definition, you're going to have a split, because that speaks to the whole something from nothing. You need to have that. You're going to have a. To what I mean by split, I wish I could elaborate more. I myself am still trying to figure that out. Whether it's, for example, people socially saying, I don't believe in any of this, and then at a certain point in time, there literally being a reality split without us realizing. And then others saying, no, I see it. So I think what we're seeing is, again, multiple factions, some of them not even physical, as we would call them, or tangible, attempting to convey certain messages for whether their own interests or for ours, a bit of both. Yeah, 100%. I think, though, however, for those that are more negatively, more glass half empty type scenario, I would say that, sure, there's a lot of negativity going on, but by definition, if there's a lot of negativity, there has to be some form of good, if you will. Now, sure, will there be deceit? Attempts to deceive people into thinking something is good? Sure. To that, I would say go truly with your intuition or your gut, if you will. Things like this, the more organic side of that, if you want to call it, because that's something that your intuition, in my opinion, has something that no chip can ever do. So
okay, now I want to go even deeper into this and the possibilities that, in a way, we're being hacked into whenever we're having these experiences. That everything is somewhat, I hate to use simulation, but everything is somewhat programmable. I had a guest on the other day, and I hope I explained this to where you and the audience can understand it, but I find this very interesting. She is researching sleep paralysis, and she was experimenting with her experiences, and a few times she had gotten a sleep mask. She did this to see if there would be a difference if she wore the sleep mask, or if she didn't, if she'd be able to see more. And the results were kind of terrifying for her, because she realized when she had the sleep mask on, it was like some kind of projection or overlay in the shape of her mask. And beyond the mask, there was something else that she couldn't make out. But she was in the paralysis state, so she couldn't take off the mask. She couldn't see what was going on. So I find that the implications of that to be kind of jarring. And
with her eyes or in her head?
What's that?
With her eyes or in her head, she was seeing.
She was seeing her, like she was in a sleep state, but she could see the mask through her subconscious, whatever vision it was, and it was projecting a dream to her. But beyond the mask shape, she could see something else. So I don't know what that means, but it kind of points to maybe that our vision is being either hacked into or programmable in some way.
I think I think that's a fair assumption to make, or a fair hypothesis, conclusion. I mean, there's certainly one can say anecdotal, but again, it speaks to this idea of what's anecdotal if we're all individually perceiving things.
And she was able to repeat this quite a few times with different overlays in the shape of a mask as she was in these dream states, which
right.
Interesting.
And it's extremely compelling. This is where my interests lie as well, because it speaks to this idea that, for example, President Clinton had a message delivered to him in 1994, I believe, saying from a doctor working on some of these the phenomenon projects, saying it comes down to consciousness. So I wish I could say I wish I could actually even observe what this lady was experiencing. One thing I can say is that there is something in remote viewing called analytical overlay, where, for example, you see something and then sometimes your own personal, whether bias, belief system, interpretation tends to butcher or muddy what you're remote viewing. So you may have an accurate depiction after you're given some coordinates of a certain place, but then, you say to yourself, no, wait, actually, this bridge, as your eyes are closed, this bridge is 50 feet not long, not 30. The 50 feet part is BS, but that's your analytical overlay, as it's called, putting that layer over top. I don't mean to say that is her analytical overlay, not at all. But it's interesting to have all these different factors put into place, and to be able to see if we can, just the same way one exercises the body, if we can decipher this consciously. You see, like, for example, okay, I'm going to train the bicep, I'm going to train the arms today, I'm going to train the legs tomorrow, things like I'm going to train the shoulders the next day. If we can somehow apply that to the mind, perhaps even in a non-local sense, consciously, forgive me for saying, because conscious is a vague word in my opinion, I think it's something that that would certainly help decipher for example, what your friend had gone through there.
Right.
Whether good or bad relative to their experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to get to kind of more nefarious possible aspects of this.
Sure.
I do believe that there are factions that are still putting mind control projects into action with the public, with the global public. Actually, I think there are people that are being taken and having experiments done on them. Now, I can't say that for sure, but it's based on all the evidence of all the guests that I've had and everything that I've learned since I started doing this. But I do believe that there are groups that are taking people, or maybe not just taking people, but somehow implanting abduction memories into them, or taking them to these underground facilities, and they are being subject to experiments of a mind control type nature. And I believe that this is based on some of the testimony that I've had from people who supposedly used to be in secret space programs, that they're not actually their consciousness isn't actually being put on another clone in Mars and these 20 and back programs, that they're just kind of being put
altered
in these virtual reality type programs to where they believe that they're having these experiences, and they're not. They're just sitting there with some kind of either device on or drugged under some experience. And it's also said that a lot of abductees with very profound experiences, this is happening to them too, whether they're being taken in the night or they're just being subject to different things while they sleep. Now, this kind of rings true to me. There's nothing provable about any of this, but I find it interesting, and I find it probably more likely than aliens coming and abducting people, maybe to get the alien narrative out there into the public. They're actually doing this to people, so they believe it so wholeheartedly, they'll go out and report it to the rest of the world as an actual event that happened to them. And like I said, this a few years ago, this would have probably sounded even more crazy to me, but I've had, whistleblowers, guests who supposedly have been put through mind control programs from a small children, and they remember what happened, and they say, yeah, I was brought to these facilities, I was either drugged or put on these devices like a virtual reality device, and I was subject to false abductions and false trip to Mars and false battles with aliens. All these things were just programmed into my mind to put forward a narrative, and I find that interesting. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Honestly, brother, I know I don't say many things with such certainty, so quite often I'd say that's real. Yeah, I don't say that happily, but yeah, I'd say it's real, 100%.
Now, have you come across any evidence or interviews or anybody that kind of pushes you to think that?
Yeah, I unfortunately can't go into any of it. I deeply apologize, but yes,
the fact that you can't go into it says a lot.
I don't mean to be deliberately mysterious. I genuinely don't, but that stuff is real, in my opinion. Yeah. The whole that speaks to psychotronics. Yeah, yeah. That's certainly, I think. It
would also put credence to the possibility that these mind control programs are still going on very large levels globally. Would you think that's also accurate?
One could argue we're in one, yeah. I don't mean to get all glass half empty, but if we're gonna, we talked about the nice things. If we're gonna cover, I would say big time. And the reason I'm a little somber on that issue is for reasons that will become clear in coming months. But yes, I think that stuff is real. I know it is. Right. I don't mean to sound so certain, but yeah.
No, now that I do have to ask you this, since you said that. The possibility that we're being subjected to it, and this could be a possibility on a global scale, that we are all being subjected to some kind of mind control reality experiment.
I'd say so. I'd say
now that's terrifying.
I don't mean to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but that's one of the reasons that I started the newsletter, to tell you the truth, between you and I, that I had read a bit of earlier in this episode. I'm hoping people, I'm not saying that I know everything. I absolutely do not. But from what I've experienced and learned and other things, I would like to do my best at the very least to be able to convey this type of understanding to people so they can do with it as they see fit. Not tell them what to do, but just lay things out and say, at least from my neck of the woods, this is how I view it. If but I would say, that goes, I'm of the humble opinion that goes back to even prior to World War One. So this speaks to this whole idea of what is real and in that whole concept, which is why, again, I don't mean to split hairs with that stuff, but yeah.
Now, you said, I don't know if you can elaborate on this, but in a couple of months, we might be finding out more. Is there anything else you could tell us about any information about that? In coming months. I don't know exactly. I'm not sure just yet, but unfortunately, I can't say anything whatsoever. But I will say that for those that are interested in the psychotronic stuff and all this kind of stuff, it's this idea that, for example, in some cases, perhaps even spirits being projection of a various form of yourself from potentially another quote unquote reality. Not saying that's all of it, but I would, if I was a betting man, which I'm not, but if I was a betting man, I would say that's some of it. Now I'm going to throw this out there. This is something that just been boiling in my mind for a while, that we have versions of ourselves outside of what we consider reality that come in and talk to us and guide us. And this is all like some kind of holographic video game that our real versions outside there, wherever they are, kind of guiding us through. I don't know. I want to just get your
I think we've been, for example, let's put it this way. I'll put it to you this way. I think we are existing within what one may call a Dyson sphere, but we are only experiencing 90-degree right angle, if not less, of that experience. And therefore, anything outside of our view, if you will, or view of stationary observation as a sovereign being becomes manipulatable by something that is not sovereign to us.
Now, I have noticed it's undeniable that we have an awakening process on this planet. More people are questioning reality. More people are actually doing something about it. More people are not participating in what they consider not reality or bullshit. And this is happening on a large scale. And I see this could cause a huge ripple in whatever timeline that we're headed. And I believe that it could completely disrupt whatever system is kind of been controlling us for the longest time. And we may get a glimpse of true reality within our lifetime. And I've thought this for a while.
Right. If you give me 10 seconds, brother, just got to run to the restroom. Be right back. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry about that. So I think this speaks to this idea of what we were speaking on earlier. I think this connects to everything we've been discussing, really, this idea of doing your, forgive me if I use shitty, not the most appropriate words here, your best to work on your organic spiritual shadow work, in the sense of understanding who are you, who am I, not just physically, but, what foods does my body like? What does it reject? What do I feel like when I'm tired? How does my body respond to this? And then you go to the mind. From the mind, you then go to the thing that the mind can't really logistically substantiate, which is the spirit. And so I think by practicing that, I think that whatever is to come, when it does come, will be something that will be far more discernible by each individual respectively, if they've done that personal shadow work, for lack of a better term. So they'll be able to say, this feels right. What I'm being exposed to, if this quote unquote matrix falls, is not a deception. It feels right. I think it's much more easier to be deceived when you don't remember or know who you are as an individual, as a person. And what I mean by that, again, very simply, start with, I don't make for crying out loud, I don't, clean the dishes as often as I should, let's say, or within a reasonable amount of time. I procrastinate. Little adjustments like that. I want to go for a walk every day instead of just sitting on the couch all the time. Things like this. And I know I'm speaking more physically. One can even apply that mentally and, of course, spiritually with meditation. I have this internal voice I can never knock out. Let me try and, knock it off, if you will. I think working on things like this will allow for more understanding of whenever things are to come and how they occur. Now, to what extent that's going to happen, I don't claim to know. I don't pretend to know. I'm not trying to be like a, secret to the universe person, not at all. I think what we're seeing is, again, this speaks to even various factions battling it out, if you will. I don't like to use the words destiny, fate, if you will, but from an archetypal perspective, I think we have, just like you drop a rock into a pond and there's a ripple, there is a stemming source from which our outcome may head to, but it's never set in stone. Things are always adjusting.
All you have to do is kind of just take a step back out of everything and look at everything from the outside, and you can see that whoever is in charge is desperately attempting to keep our attention in this matrix, to keep us asleep, to keep us unaware, and it's going to keep trying to throw anything it can at us to keep us from waking up. And we see that playing out every day with every new stupid agenda that people are just like, no, not paying attention to. No, that's ridiculous. I'm not doing that. And the more it seems like the more that they attempt to keep us in there, the more we're breaking out and realizing that this is all BS. And it seems to be in some kind of quickening stage right now, especially, of course, since 2020. I don't know if there's this concerted effort by some group that is, in control of our reality to that they knew 2020 would be a powerful year or something would be occurring during this time, that they had to step up their efforts to keep us in this. But I can definitely feel that we're in a very important time right now, and we have more and more people coming around to that.
Well, to your point, there are people that are just by definition craving more information, whether it's people coming out with, to tell you the truth, I was a little bit, not for anyone in particular, but a little bit concerned that, a year or two ago, I was saying to myself, is the podcasting realm going to become saturated? One could argue that it is, but at the same time, I wonder now, is it really, when people constantly want more and more information, it's gotten to the point where, again, instead of, 5-10 million people tuning into CNN, you got, 500,000 people, for example, on, someone else's show, you got, 50,000 on this guy's show. So now everything's being distributed more equally, in my opinion. I wish that was the case more in a financial sense, but yeah, no, 100%. I think what we're seeing is, and I don't mean to allude to socialism. I just mean the idea of, these elites milking the global economies on a transnational scale, allegedly. But yeah, man, I think that what we're seeing is overall that you can take all of that and go, okay, there's whether we talk timelines, realities, multiverses, you name it. That's why I say I check all the above, because there are things that exist but don't exist simultaneously. It depends on where you are, how you perceive them, you name it. So I think, again, I don't mean to make this a cop-out answer, but no one is ever really wrong, but also no one is ever really right. So I think and I think what we're seeing now is the idea now where the technology is moving substantially faster than the culture, and people trying to work on themselves. I think that's the lack. People are now constantly in line. I talked about this on a recent members episode I did for, an iPhone. People seem to be more enthralled by the idea of pursuing the iPhone than when they actually buy it and pick it up in their hands. Once it's in their hands, they got to convince themselves, oh, no, this was worth the wait in that line. You see what I'm saying? So I think that's what we're seeing as well. And I'm not one to talk at all, but perhaps on a large scale, not everyone, but some sovereign immaturity, perhaps. Now, again, I want to be very clear. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone, because I'm not one to talk myself. But I think, yeah, if you wanted my take on that, that's where I go.
Right on, man. Yeah.
Go ahead. If I could say one last thing, if it was up to me, man, personally, to me, I don't care what anyone thinks. When I say this, I would limit technology to only creative, positive use, and then the rest I would go land off the land. I would say the Earth is the most beautiful piece of quote unquote technology we have.
Yeah, well, I think that technology is definitely a double-edged sword, but I also think that if this current system crumbles and these elites that are in charge of the bulk of technology right now, if that were fall into our hands, if it were fall into benevolent hands, maybe it could be completely re-engineered into something that would be completely beneficial for us and on all levels. But it seems like we're always going to have these sides that want us to be kept in this matrix reality, kept asleep.
Well,
and
if I could add to that point, to your point, I think what we're seeing, for example, is one of my concerns, many people's concerns, I would say, is that, for example, like if for those that have seen, this has been demonstrated in other cases before, but like the Hunger Games series, the final film, where, for example, they have the revolt and everything works and they do the coup and all that for the betterment of the people of, Pan Am or whatever it's called. But ultimately you see President Snow is killed, but then you look, for example, at the one that took over, and Katniss realized, is there really a difference?
Yeah.
And I think this is the concern as well. If this stuff comes out, for example, say, brother, you and I get together and we say we form a tribe, if you will, everyone all over the planet's, isolated in different pockets of land. Now, let's just say world governments have been overthrown. Space travel is a thing. The question then becomes, and I don't know the answer to this. I don't claim to be I should be the arbitrator of this whatsoever, the moral arbitrator. But to what extent do we now say, okay, certain groups can have this tech, certain groups cannot? You see what I'm saying? And I mean that because, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone individually, but we all have our bad days. All it takes is one. And I'm not saying that this is reason to be hidden, but at the same time, I think it's reason for concern, for control and stability when someone says, oh my gosh, I had a bad day. My girlfriend broke up with me, and they make something that puts guns and bullets to shame, very sadly, because it is, in my opinion, that much more stronger, and that to build, and potentially not as difficult as one may think. So
we've programmed ourselves so nefariously over the past thousands and thousands of years that how, can we get back to the original human that we were within, instantly? It's going to be impossible. It's going to take a long time. And I think we're at the very beginning stages of maybe going back to something that may even resemble the original human and having our consciousness abilities. But I think that's going to take a very long time. And we have to, somehow keep at this, whatever's happening, to where it doesn't reverse and go back the other direction, which is also possible.
I couldn't agree more, man. I truly could not agree more. And please forgive me. I don't mean to cut it short, but I do have to get going.
No worries, man. Yeah, I want to thank you so much for coming. Before you head out, though, let everybody know where they can find your podcast, website, all the good stuff.
Sure. Thank you so much. Patreon.com/GenerationZ is where you can dive into most of the stuff that we're doing there. DaveZed.substack.com as well for a newsletter. We just started, as well as we touched on a lot of the things that in the newsletter that we discussed today here. So if you folks enjoy what you heard today, I would truly appreciate it. Of course, Generation Z, ZED podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and of course, YouTube as well. We have a great partner of the show, Riel. He helps with the news and things like this, whereas I can work more on the members science side of things like that. So again, I want to thank you so much, brother, for having me on. It's truly been an honor. I'm very grateful. And that's basically where we could we're gonna have to pick this up and do it again soon. Thank you so much, man. Thank you. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. See y'all then.